All right, so we're here in Montana at the Red Pill Expo. We're with Dan Johnson. He runs the Tax Revolution Institute, and he gave a really interesting speech today talking about how we can do things better than the government. So Dan, tell us a little bit about your idea there.
So it's called the We Do Better Project, and really what it's about is instead of focusing on the government, sending our attention, spending our time to the government, let's get rid of one regulation, or let's roll back one law, let's do something like that. Realistically, a lot of the public services that government provides today are already provided by we the people. We already do a better job. You look at organizations in our community such as churches, for example, that provide a lot of the social welfare for people who need it. And you look at government programs like the welfare system, for example, where for every $10 that you and I pay into the welfare system, only $2.60 of that actually ends up in the hands of a welfare recipient. And if instead of us going, government bad, government's evil and all that stuff, instead of us going like that, looking to solutions in our community and saying, look, we just want literally more than 20%, 30% to actually go to the people in need, that instead of it being on the one side, the Republicans are slash and burn, the other side, the Democrats are throw more money at it. That we say we actually already can and are already doing a better job than the government in providing a lot of the public services that are out there. And I gave some examples in the presentation, including Kiva, for example, where it's microfinancing, so we're lending money to the poor instead of giving the money straight out, and 97% repayment rate, and things like the Detroit Threat Management Center, where over the past 20 years, they've worked in some of the roughest neighborhoods in Detroit, and yet their cops have only shot one person because they focus more on prevention than on stopping the crime when it happens. You got to prevent it first. It's a lot cheaper. Prevention, prevention, worse a pound of cure. That if we start focusing on these options and what is available, we will actually start to shift the debate to a question of who provides the better services, rather than either I get the service from government or I get it nowhere else.
So have you guys started putting any of this into practice? What are the next steps in the project?
Absolutely. So on one hand, the project is ideological. It is changing the mindset, changing it from stop talking about as much how bad government is and start focusing on the solutions that we provide. And also, when some politician comes out and says, my new bill will do all of these things for the children, instead of going, no, it won't, which is a very simple answer, but instead of going, no, it won't, we go, actually, here are 13 other programs that do better for the children than your bill ever could. And what your bill is actually going to do is going to take money away from those programs and spend it on this instead. And quite frankly, that's a moral outrage that you should not be allowed to do that. So it's changing the debate on that level. But not only do we have to turn our attention away from the government specifically, what you focus on, you make bigger, but we also have to take our tax dollars back. There's a great law in Arizona. I don't usually say great law, but there's a great law in Arizona called the charitable tax credit. It allows taxpayers in Arizona to redirect up to 400 of their tax dollars that they would otherwise owe the state to any nonprofit in the state that works with low-income people. And if we had more programs like this throughout the country, where taxpayers could not only focus on we the people and the programs and the projects that we have that take care of people better, but also to redirect our tax dollars to those programs and the people directly funding these organizations and these programs.
So, so where in other states, what other kind of initiatives like this are being put forward? Is there any model legislation people can look at?
Absolutely. So we thought the Arizona model was so perfect as an example of us being able to not only do better, but move our tax dollars to what does better, that we modified it. We created the universal tax credit out of the Arizona model, because the Arizona model has a few restrictions. You can't donate to organizations that don't spend 50% of their revenue on low-income people, so you get a little bit of regulation in there. There's a little bit of problems, I think, with it. But we modified that for several different states. We're actually in the process of modifying modifying it for all 50 states all around the country. And not just for income taxes, for sales taxes, for different types of consumption taxes. The difference between a sales tax and income tax from this perspective is the income tax is paid by like an individual taxpayer, whereas the sales tax is paid by the business. So in this case, it would be the business donating, say, $10,000 of their tax bill to charity. Mm-hmm. Imagine what that does to your business community. Where the business is like, well, you want to shop here. They already kind of do it. Delta, for example, Delta Airlines has this. We donate 1% of our corporate profits to charity. They put it in their videos. But imagine if the businesses in your community are like, well, we put our money toward this food bank. Here's why you should shop here. The social responsibility that introduces into the business community in states like Washington State that don't have an income tax, for example. There's a lot of options for you to implement this in your city, in your county, in your state. And the fact that it's already been in place for 20 years and that all they've been able to do for it is double it. There's a bright future for the universal and charitable tax credits. And they were actually introduced in Congress a couple of different times. A former Congressman, Ron Paul, was a co-sponsor of the universal tax credit in Congress. They were introduced in the 90s and in the early 2000s. They did come up a couple times. Obviously, getting politicians to give up their tax dollars is not the easiest thing in the world. But we've already seen some action kind of across the spectrum on this. And if states and communities started adopting this, all of a sudden now government agencies have to compete. And why does the government hate competition? They usually lose. So really, though, this is about helping people. This is about, how can we, when someone gets to that point that they need help. I talked about being on food stamps for a little while when I was up there. When someone eventually gets to the point that they need help, I think the system that should be in place is a system run by individuals, an individual giving to an individual, not a middleman in the way that we call government.
Very good. And I know back in the day, at least some years ago, you were really active in the fight against the NDAA. Maybe you still are. Yeah. What's the status with that? Can we all still be arrested without trial, without charges, indefinitely? So what's the deal with that, and is there any progress on getting rid of that?
Absolutely. So as you know, I was the national director for People Against the NDAA. It was my first organization, kind of my baby to me. And one of the reasons I went into We Do Better and the Tax Revolution Institute is I realized that you had to have more than just a law preventing the government from detaining people. The federal government's not fond of following its own laws. And when you see that even police departments would ignore their own policies, they would ignore, you started to realize that the law was a great educational tool. And so the laws we passed in various cities around the country, including Albany, New York, they're great educational tools, and it was a great stand to go talk to people. This is what shouldn't happen in your community. Would they actually stop an indefinite detention? Well, that is a question mark that remains in the air. And so you have to go after the money. If you don't go after the money, the government will be able to institute whatever tyranny it wants, including the National Defense Authorization Act. That said, there's a really, on the federal level, there's a really great bill that was introduced by Senator Rand Paul. Now we criticized Senator Paul at People Against the NDAA, Patriot Coalition, even the 10th Amendment Center criticized Senator Paul when he introduced the Do Nothing Guarantee Act in 2013. And the Do Nothing Guarantee Act, or what they call the Due Process Guarantee Act, basically said that if you have access to an Article III court, i.e. a civilian court, if you have access to a civilian court, then you have access to all your rights. Which is great, except for under the 2012 NDAA, you don't have access to a civilian court. So, we were very harsh on it. We issued a report called 2013 NDAA Smoke and Mirrors. We excoriated, we went on a media campaign. We were very serious that should not go in the bill because it would just make things more confusing. And if you've explained the NDAA a few times, it's already confusing. And if you had a thing in there that says, well, now you're protected if you get to an Article III court, now we're explaining ourselves in circles. And Senator Paul did something that I really respect. He took that advice. I didn't know about it. I didn't know I had active legislation in Congress for the past 3 years. But Senator Paul introduced the Sixth Amendment Preservation Act. And the Sixth Amendment Preservation Act, not only does it repeal the NDAA, which we'd always been concerned about, but it actually repeals the underlying authority for the National Defense Authorization Act, which was the 2001 authorization for use of military force. And it changes the law passed after the Japanese-American detention, so that it used to say, unless an act of Congress says you can detain people, you can't detain people. Under Rand's bill, it would say, unless that is consistent with the Constitution, you can't detain people. If there is a chance to bring this issue back in the national spotlight and really point out a really important issue, I mean, the government's ability to detain someone in the middle of the night, lock them up, and drag them off. There's really an ability to bring a lot of attention, talking about education with the law. There's a ability to bring a lot of attention to this issue. It is Senator Paul's bill, and I'm very, very happy that the Sixth Amendment Preservation Act was introduced. And I hope to see vigorous debate on it in the Senate this year, especially since we've had Fox News anchors go on talking about Muslim internment camps. And, when that type of national discourse is allowed in America, you live in dangerous times. And I think that the 2012 NDAA is kind of the pinnacle of government tyranny to me. And I really applaud his efforts to do that on behalf of Panda. And I think that if people start calling out and highlighting that Sixth Amendment Preservation Act, that can be brought back in the public sphere.
Oh, very good. So is there anything else you want to tell us? And where can people find out more information about the tax initiatives you're talking about and the NDAA stuff?
Absolutely. So, I think the long story short, and the point I've tried to get across at Red Pill is we need to stop putting the focus on having a nicer, kinder government solution. If government schools ran this way, they'd be so much better. And we need to realize that because the government does not have to earn our money, that at the core of it, that creates all of those systematic problems, and we're constantly fighting an uphill battle. If you go to a restaurant and you get really terrible soup, and this soup is it's just awful, you are infuriated, and the waitress is like, I don't really care, whatever. You get in the number for corporate, you're storming out to your car, and you see there's another restaurant over there with soup. The odds are you're probably going to want to go over to that restaurant and at least try their soup before you go, try to fix this restaurant's soup. And I think we need to approach that the same way with government. We've gotten bad soup from government. We know government produces terrible soup. And we, the people and the organizations and the nonprofits and the corporations that provide public services, we've always produced better soup, more efficiently at a better cost and better quality. We're not the DMV producing soup. We've always produced better soup, and I think the focus should be on the restaurant that produces better soup rather than trying to fix the restaurant that produces terrible soup. So you can find more information about the tax initiatives and the charitable tax credit, things like that, taxrevolution.us. You can find more information about the National Defense Authorization Act if you're not entirely familiar with it at Panda Unite, that's pandaunite.org.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dan.